The goal of the Israeli government is abundantly clear as we continue to witness the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza. The Commission finds it is genocide. In our report, the Commission found that the Israeli authorities and Israeli security forces committed and are continuing to commit the following underlying acts of genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births.
In Sydney, Australia, is Antony Loewenstein, an independent journalist, author of the book The Palestine Laboratory. He was based in occupied East Jerusalem between 2016 and 2020. Antony, you've been using the word genocide for a long, long time. You have witnessed this yourself. You've seen it for yourself. You've researched it, and the UN backs you up.
And it's thoroughly welcome that the UN report says this, on top of course, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the key Israeli human rights organisations, Palestinian human rights organisations. What, of course, has been missing for pretty much 2 years is the will to stop it, the political pressure to stop it. The US, of course, is the main player here, but we're not just talking about Washington. I mean, as much as there is growing outrage in Europe, particularly with certain governments, Spain, Ireland, ultimately, let's be clear, the Europeans, many of them, are still buying heaps of Israeli weapons and surveillance tech. Last year, 2024, the largest proportion of weapons that were bought from Israel were European. So, yes, I welcome this report, and I'm not for a second minimising its importance. It adds to the body of work that says and shows clearly that genocide is still taking place. But what is still missing from the European Union, from the US, of course, and frankly from much of the Arab world, is tangible economic pressure and action. Sanctions, stopping to buy weapons, that has not stopped to this day.
But that must surely be coming because of these increasing findings, these increasing commissions. What's happening at the ICC, at the ICJ? It will become, as Jeffrey Nice was telling us, that it will become more and more difficult for any country to be able to continue business as usual. This may well be a turning point. Do these turning points, do they get acted on quickly, or does it take a long time?
Well, with the campaign against apartheid South Africa back in the day, certainly it was not overnight. I mean, for much of apartheid's history, started after World War II and ended, of course, in 1994, the vast bulk of the Western world supported it. I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about Western elites. It was really only in the 70s, 80s, and of course it ended in the 90s that situation thankfully ended. And you say that surely this must be a tipping point, but it's also worth saying just this week Netanyahu gave a very interesting speech where he almost acknowledged the fact that Israel's entering an incredibly difficult period. He talked about a period of isolation coming, which already exists in a way, and saying that Israel needs to essentially be a Sparta, historically a reference to a nation that is eternally at war, forever wars, forever. And we need to produce far more weapons within Israel, which is something that Israel has been starting to do, particularly accelerating since October 7. So to answer your question, yes, there are growing numbers of nations that are much more likely to act. But again, it comes to the same question. What does acting actually mean here? It means economic pressure and pain. The only thing that ended apartheid South Africa's awful regime in 1994, the cultural boycotts were vital. It was economic pain, economic isolation. And Israel still, let's be clear, is still a long way away from that at this point.
Antony, what do you think this latest finding by the United Nations will mean for the people of Israel? What I'm getting at here is the distinction between those who come out every week to demand an end to the war on Gaza and the release of Israeli hostages and their feelings towards their government. Are they anti-government, or are they more concerned about the Israeli hostages rather than the people of Gaza? It's a bit of a delicate balance. You can be pro-Netanyahu, but you can be against his policies in Gaza.
Well, it's worth saying that, yes, there are growing protests within Israel against the government to end the war, to get the Israeli Jewish hostages out, which are all reasonable demands, of course. But it's important to say that in poll after poll after poll of the Israeli Jewish public, this has been going for years, but especially this year, just this week, there was a new poll that found 75% of Israeli Jews supported Israel's strike on Doha, Qatar in the last week or so. A recent poll found that the majority of Israeli Jews did not care about Palestinians starving in Gaza. They support the idea of forcible removal of Palestinians from Gaza. So if you ask me, how do the majority of Israeli Jews feel and what do they think should happen? They want Palestinians not to exist, to be removed from the West Bank and Gaza, and I would argue from Israel itself. Now, that's not going to happen tomorrow or next week, but the fact that there is growing opposition to the war does not mean that that translates to a care for Palestinians at all. There are a minority of Israeli Jews who, of course, support Palestinians, who are against the war, who have protests holding pictures of murdered Palestinian kids murdered by Israel. That's undeniably true, and those numbers are growing, but they're a tiny minority. And as I've been saying for a long time, there is what I still call a genocide mania amongst many in the Israeli Jewish population. And although in the global Jewish diaspora, of which I'm a part, there is growing outrage about what Israel's doing, particularly younger Jews are speaking out. Many of the so-called leaders of the mainstream Jewish communities in the US, UK, Europe and Australia are still 110% behind what Israel is doing. That needs to change because if nothing else, as a religion, Judaism is being tarred for generations because of what the state of Israel is doing to Palestinians.
So do you see possibly the far right retaining power when the next elections come around in Israel, whether Benjamin Netanyahu is involved or not?
Well, it's certainly very possible. In fact, the likely successors to Netanyahu, if he does not win, and let's face it, he might, the election is supposed to be by the end of 26, is someone like Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett is a far-right ideologue who supports pretty much everything Netanyahu is standing for. He claims, with some truth, that there's a deeply corrupt core at Netanyahu's government. Undeniably true, but the politics around Gaza, the West Bank, etc., are very similar. If there is a belief in the world outside Israel that a more liberal, progressive, open-minded, less racist, expansionist government will emerge in Israel, the chances of that are very, very slim. And I think much of the world needs to prepare itself for the fact that the post-Netanyahu world, which will happen at some point, is not likely to look that different within Israel to what it looks like now, which is why economic pressure is the only way this will end, and sanctions and stopping buying Israeli weapons and surveillance tech. The only way.
Okay, so if it's down to European countries and it's down to, as the Commission said, the facilitators, the United States, therefore possibly there won't be enough action. When those countries from the Middle East and other Islamic nations came together in Doha 24 hours ago, it was possible that there were going to be some concrete measures announced at the end of that event, but there were none. Is it now incumbent upon Arab countries, regional nations, to start taking more responsibility for the region and for the security interests and the dangers presented to that security by Israel?
Well, it's long overdue. And let's be clear about this, that the vast majority of these Arab states, which of course are all dictatorships, are solely reliant on the US. I mean, the US is their so-called security guarantee. Now, I know the Israeli bombing of Doha caused them deep concern, understandably, because Qatar and the US are supposed to be incredibly close as America's biggest military base in Qatar, and Israel still bombed them. But the fact is that here we are nearly 2 years into this genocide, and the Abraham Accords are still going. None of those states have pulled out at all. In fact, they still talk about it being expanded to potentially include Saudi Arabia. I think there is in my view, deluded belief that somehow is a potential way forward here. And it's also worth saying that as years go on, a key reason why Washington is always obsessed over much of the Arab world is oil, resources. And as the world increasingly relies less on oil, oil is still central to the global economy, in my view, very unfortunately, but it will remain that way for a while. But it's going in a certain direction, which is less. And the Arab states need to realise and think about far more seriously, what does a world look like where Washington is not their sugar daddy? Because that's basically what it is now, which is why I think still today, after 2 years of genocide, they refuse to take concrete action. Cutting formal ties would be a great start. They're not doing that. And I fear that they won't, absent of some other massive escalation. And let's be clear finally on this point, that Israel's goal with Netanyahu is expansionist. It's building a growing Zionist empire in the Middle East. Israel's been bombing countless Middle Eastern nations, of course. But beyond that, it is having a potential military presence in Syria, in Lebanon. Greater Israel ideologues believe it should include places like Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq. Now, this is the threat that Arab states face, and they need to get serious about addressing it now.
Antony Loewenstein, as always, Antony, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.